Okay, it's 7:02, and I think that we'll get started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Abel Olivo. I'm the Executive Director for Defensores de la Cuenca, and I'm the moderator for tonight's forum. Welcome, everybody. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. As you see on the screen here, the chat is open for your comments and questions. The audio is turned off during the presentations, but will be turned on during Q&A. And obviously the small breakout groups. If you feel comfortable turning on your cameras to share your video, that would be wonderful. But if not, that is fine as well. Let's see, we are recording this session. So again, if you're not comfortable with your image being recorded, feel free to turn off your video. And then if you will put in the chat, please let us know where you're joining us from, your city, your town, state, county, country even. And we'll get started here. Let's see. And before we get started, Luis, we'd like to start out with our land acknowledgements. If you could take us through that, please.
Okay. So I want to acknowledge that our speakers and our moderator are from the traditional territory of the Pawtucket, Massachusetts, Munsee, Lenape, Anacostan, and Piscataway peoples.
Thank you very much for that. And just a brief description. So again, tonight's forum, which is brought to us by DIY Green, is titled Nature's Solution, Our Resilience to Climate Change. And just a brief description about that. Throughout the world, communities are restoring ecosystems to mitigate the impacts of climate change and strengthen community resilience. Natural resources are being replenished, including perennial foods, running water, clean air, and irrigated healthy soils, all of which are needed for communities to survive and thrive. Specifically, these communities are growing food successfully in regions that were barren or were not drought, or where drought had decimated decimated farming. They have regreened neighborhoods and cities and reduced high summertime temperatures. They have replenished water tables and wells by restoring native vegetation. Tonight, we're going to learn about these vital solutions and discover how you can take small steps to implement similar ecosystem restoration strategies in your own yard or in your own neighborhood. Our goal is for you to leave this event ready to implement practical steps you can take to strengthen your resilience to climate change where you live. We invite you to join us by signing up to implement a small restoration project in your yard or in your community. Our speakers will provide support on this initiative via online training tools, other resources, and follow-up Zoom calls in the fall and spring of 2022. And with that, I will hand it over to Annabelle with DIY Green. Annabelle?
Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing? DIY Green is a project that started with my friend Margie, who's also on the call, and me thinking that we really want to figure out how we can turn all the anxiety that we have about climate change and see if we can engage people in a more practical way and also in a more personal way, so that we're not just talking about how much we fear climate change and all the big global policies we want to change and all the changes we want to see from big corporations like BP and Shell and Exxon. So we're asking people to see if we can start to take small steps as individuals and as communities and see if we can really create a real kind of cultural and also I would call it existential shift so that we're actually adapting to climate change and organizing the best that we can as communities to be prepared for disasters, for the catastrophes that are ahead of us, but also, in my opinion, it's an opportunity for us to really hit reset on asking questions about how should we live our lives? What makes us really healthy? What makes us happy? And address a lot of the core issues that don't get addressed because there's no organizing around it. For instance, loneliness. So we're just getting started. We actually have a campus in West Virginia, in Lost River, West Virginia. We just got here, so I've been very focused on finding the property and getting here and setting up. But we're here, so we're going to organize in-person meetings, but we're going to do a lot of online meetings like this. I want to try an experiment, and I'm going to give you a link for this. It's going to be a weekly chat for us, for the community here, for us to just share ideas and to just be in communication with each other. And I'm hoping that we could work towards having a hybrid kind of mini conference in the fall, where we can kind of really go deep into how we can work together as a community and really share the changes that we're looking for and the lessons that we have already learned. So anyway, so thank you so much everyone for being here. Thank you everyone who's organizing and speaking. I really appreciate it. Gives me hope. So, and visit us at DIYgreen.org.
Thank you, Annabelle. And Jim, if you could talk to us about the Ecosystem Studies Group.
Hi, let's see. Yes, I'm Jim Lawrenson, and you can't see me because I ran out of number of people that I could spotlight, I think. But I am one of the co-chairs of something called the Cedar Lane Ecosystem Study Group, and it is here I am, okay. And that's Cedar Lane, Unitarian Universalist Church behind me in Bethesda, Maryland. We're a group of probably 25 to 30 local scientists, activists, just regular people. We're all regular people, and we're just trying to really study the technical details to try to inform a lot of our local activist groups in what are the best ways to deal with this crisis. We are one of the largest counties, Montgomery County in Maryland, to create a climate action plan. And so we are all over that and are, again, helping a lot of the local activist groups react appropriately when we're getting greenwashed or dealing with something that isn't going to really deal with the crisis. So thank you for joining us here.
Thank you, Jim. And just before we get going anymore, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the event co-sponsors, Rev Deli Ministry, Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, Ridges to Reefs, and of course, Defensores de la Cuenca, and to the to Dunia Moja crew, I'm sorry, I can't read that. Your Environmental Health Trust and Your Wonderful World. I think that's correct.
Your Wordsworth.
Oh, Your Wordsworth. Your Wordsworth. Thank you to all the sponsors and the folks who came together to make this possible. Next slide. So how does resilience show up in our lives? We have the the definition of resilience in terms of ecology is a capacity of an ecosystem to respond to a perturbation or disturbance by resisting damage and recovering quickly, right? So we think about it in terms of the ability to cope with whatever life throws at you, as it's shown in this quote here, the ability to community to adapt to living with uncertainty, and the capacity of an ecosystem to respond to disturbance by resisting damage and recovering quickly, which I just said. So we each have our own way of dealing with things. And tonight we're going to hear from two wonderful experts who have experience in resilience, in practice, in terms of philosophy, in terms of connection. And we're really excited to hear about them. There is a poll, I believe, that we ask each of you to participate in. If you just go to your polling button, I believe at the bottom of your screen. Oh, here we go. And if you could just tell us where you're from quickly, so that we can pair you up in our breakout group. So that's really important to participate so that we can properly connect you with other folks. And while that is going on, I'm going to just introduce you to the first of our presenters, Adam Sachs. I'll just be reading his introduction here. Adam has had careers in education, holistic medicine, computer technology, politics, and advocacy. For 5 years, he directed a nonprofit that worked with communities invoking basic democratic and constitutional principles to oppose detrimental local corporate activity. He has been a climate activist since 1999 and has been studying and writing about nature solutions since 2009. He is executive director of Biodiversity for a Living Climate, which he co-founded in 2013. He holds an ED from the University of Massachusetts and an ND naturopathic doctor, from Bastyr University. On the side, he is an artist and writer. His primary goal is regeneration of biodiversity and a livable planet. So thank you to Adam Sachs for being here, and take it away.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. I know several of you, and I suspect you're all pretty well tuned in to the level of urgency. But my experience with being tuned into the level of urgency with people is that it's still not really real. We want to respond, and yet we are very much involved in our normal daily lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how bad it all is, and then talk about how good it all is. And some of you know this, and the slides are going all over the place, but there you go. Okay. This is the Lytton wildfire a few weeks ago, and the town disappeared. It melted. It was devastated, and there is what it looked like. The cars melted, and the houses burned down, and people really had nowhere to go. And next slide, what can you do except run? And run to where? And how much time do you have? Are you ready to run? Are any of us ready to run? I'm not yet. And yet, who knows how fast this is going to come down. The heat dome over the Pacific Northwest caught us completely by surprise. And there's floods as well. Next slide. And the irony of that next to the droughts. And then there's the the pandemic that, okay, things are bouncing all over my screen. This relentless pandemic, which is likely part of the same biodiversity climate emergency picture. To top it all off, there's a growing understanding that green energy is a palliative that provides temporary comfort, but is virtually guaranteed to fall far short of its promise and leave us abandoned in a bleak energy landscape. And this is a recent paper that came out actually in the last few days by William Rees and Margaret Seibert. And they actually, I think I'll read you the abstract because it's really important. They say, we add to the emerging body of literature highlighting cracks in the foundation of the mainstream energy transition narrative. We offer a tripartite analysis that recharacterizes the climate crisis within its broader context of ecological overshoot, highlights numerous collectively fatal problems with so-called renewable energy technologies, and suggests alternative solutions that entail a contraction of the human enterprise. This analysis makes clear that the pat notion of, quote, affordable clean energy, unquote, views the world through a narrow keyhole that is blind to innumerable economic, ecological, and social costs. These undesirable externalities can no longer be ignored. To achieve sustainability and salvage civilization, society must embark on a planned cooperative descent from an extreme state of overshoot in just a decade or two. While it might be easier for the proverbial camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for global society to succeed in this endeavor, history is replete with stellar achievements that have arisen only from a dogged pursuit of the seemingly impossible. And that's what we are here today doing. We are doggedly pursuing the seemingly impossible. Next slide. This is the Tower of Babel, the voice of civilization bereft of a connection with the daily hum of living systems on Earth. It represents our demands that exceed the ability of our habitats to support us. In biblical terms, the lightning represents the wrath of God and the hubris of humans thinking that they can build a tower to the heavens. In biological terms, it is the loss of habitats and species resulting in overshoot, the extraction of resources to the point where they cannot regenerate and support living systems until our demands are in line with the limits to growth. It all sounds metaphorical until this spring and summer of 2021, when, after years of occasional weather weirdness and seemingly unconnected climate-related disasters, all hell broke loose. It's our spectacular ambition to conquer the earth that ends with disaster. Next slide, please. I wrote about overshoot in 2009 in Grist. I could have written it yesterday. So far, not so good. What happened to the slide? There we go. You want to, right there, you want to just play the video? Writers everywhere began cranking out today, suddenly, writers everywhere began cranking out extreme emergency packages for the public. Do we have sound?
Do you want the sound? Yeah, so I didn't click
yeah.
I didn't know there was a video, so let me
Okay.
turn on sound, see if that works.
Extreme emergency packages for the public are being cranked out now, of the kind we had been pleading. So we were pleading with the Boston Globe to pay attention, and they didn't pay. They didn't pay much attention. But then just a few days ago, they did this. And finally, I guess we're making progress. So this technology, I'm sorry, folks, I would apologize for it, except it's not, it's not working too well.
Want the next slide or?
No, I want my next, my next set of notes. Just stay right there.
Sorry.
2 years later, well, go back to the Welcome to Climate Apocalypse. That's what they finally published just a few days ago. So I guess that's progress from the news media perspective. But what they still haven't done is add emphasis on how many remarkable tools we have available to address our multiple crises. We know how to fix all of these things, and we have examples from around the world, and there are literally millions of people everywhere busy at work, and we'll get to that shortly. Next slide. So this is our famous hockey stick, and this is the exponential path we're on. We're not there yet. Back. I'll just say next slide. So previous slide. This is the path we're on, and when we get to somewhere where something strange happens, like in the past couple of weeks, it looks to us like this. Next slide. So we don't see the exponential curve. We see today, whenever and whatever's happening today, that's the normal. But unfortunately, it doesn't serve us well because we have to look at where we're going. Next. These are all forebodings of civilizational collapse, which is driven by overshoot. The average lifetime of these civilizations was 336 years. Some of them went 1,000 years, but none of them went much longer than that. Next slide. So that's what it looks like. It's not a bug. Toynbee says civilizations take their own lives. I'm not quite so sure about that, but it is a process that happens over and over again. And it is because civilizations, by their very nature, go into overshoot. Next slide, please. So this is a grim view of where limits to growth still hasn't dawned on Prudential, or for that matter, any other corporation that needs growth to survive. Next slide. So now what do? Well, next slide. We cool the earth. That is by far the most important thing we can do. Yes, greenhouse gases have got to go down, but greenhouse gases are just the blanket holding the heat in the earth. If we cool the earth, there's much less heat for the greenhouse gases to blanket. And even though they're still elevated, there are many things that we can do. Next slide. So some of you have seen this slide before. This is my former front yard on a 90-degree day. And I took the temperature from under the bushes by the house to the road, which is dark and absorbs heat. And the difference in temperature between the coolest and the warmest spot in this picture is 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is a condition that we can remedy. It has to do with water, and it has to do with shade, and it has to do with how much temperature the buildings and the other infrastructure absorb. So a few things that we can do, just a few. there are many, many more. Next slide, please. This is Paradise Lot. Eric Tonesmeyer and Jonathan Bates were two permaculturists up in the mountains, and they decided to tackle a real job. And they moved to Holyoke, Massachusetts, a post-industrial city. They bought a house on 1/10 of an acre lot. The lot was entirely bare. And over a period of just a few years, they turned it into a highly productive food forest, which generated around 2/3 of their food. Next, please. Sometimes it pays paradise to pull out a parking lot. Homeowners in Somerville, Massachusetts, which has chronic flooding problems, have been removing impermeable surfaces from their property. They have a party with friends, neighbors, musicians, and pizza. They tear up the old asphalt, and a year later, plants are merrily blooming. It helps that Massachusetts gets 45 inches of rain a year, but similar results can be had in drier climates with indigenous plants and a bit more time. Next, please. This is a severely eroded field in Kosice in Slovakia. And this is a project, one of many projects by Michael Kravchuk, an innovative hydrologist. Next, please. 9 months later, this is what you saw. Plants are growing, the gullies are filling with water and silt, and it even sprouted a dog. Next, please. These are check dams. These are humans acting as beavers. We put little logs across. These are degraded logging roads in forests that have become gullies, and put the logs across for check dams. They're semi-permeable dams. The water flows through and leaves silt behind, and on the silt grow all kinds of plants, and the logging roads are on their way to being healed. Next, this is land in Mexico that has been mistreated and partly desertified. And within 2 years and proper land management and capture of water, you get something very different. Next slide. Next slide is Zimbabwe, overgrazed land that that hasn't been cared for years. This is on property near Alan Savory's ranch in outside of Victoria Falls. And with 3 years of good grazing, the land is well on its way to restoration. Next slide, please. Here is, I'm having trouble staying in sync. Oh, okay. Next slide. This is Las Pilas Ranch in Coahuila, Mexico, in an area with an average rainfall between 13 and 18 inches. It's about 1/3 of what we get in Massachusetts. In 1978, a man-made pond was bulldozed to store water for cattle. By 2003, the barren landscape was completely revived by grazing and managing the land with regenerative practices. During the restoration period, next slide, please, the livestock population was doubled to keep up with grass growth, and grazing was done according to a plan that paid close attention to grass and soil health. And this is familiar to probably all of us these days. And here you have 25 years later, holding about 6 times as much water as before. Next slide. This is Dixie Creek in Nevada, and it's a brief video with Carol Evans, who spoke at our 2015 conference about
My name
the
is Carol Evans.
restoration in northeastern Nevada.
I've been following streams in northeastern Nevada since I became a Bureau of Land Management biologist in 1988. I'm retired now, but I'm still following streams. The streams here have stories to tell. If you change the way cows graze on a stream, the plants grow back and the beaver come in, and that changes everything. That is what happened on Dixie Creek, a little stream near Elko, Nevada. This is Dixie Creek's story. In 1990, the agency I worked for built some fences on Dixie Creek so the grazing could be managed. In other words, over the last 3 decades, cattle could be on some of the area, some of the time, but not all of the area, all of the time. This is Dixie Creek 30 years later. When the plants grow and the beaver come back, the magic happens. Scientists are starting to think this is how streams here used to look and function before the time of European settlement. There are a lot of ways to manage livestock grazing on streams so the plants come back. And I've spent a whole career working with ranchers here in northeastern Nevada doing just that. But this story is about what happens once those plants come back. Beaver need the plants that grow along streams for food and for materials to build their dams. So when managing livestock grazing leads to plants like sedges and rushes and willows coming back, the beavers show up and a dry bed of gravel turns into a magnificent wetland. What could this teach us about what we've lost and what we can find again? What can this teach us about how to heal an ailing planet? In January of 2019, some friends and I set out to tell the story of a recovered Dixie Creek and its beaver over the course of a year. What if people like scientists and sportsmen, like ranchers and land managers, or even people who just like to be outside, could share a common vision of what these streams could be, a place where beaver could thrive and create these magnificent wetlands full of water and wildlife? Every stream has a story to tell. What it once was, what it can be again. How grazing can be managed to get the plants to grow back, which attracts the beaver, and how together those two things can offer hope for a better future. My name is Carol Evans. I've been following streams in northeastern Nevada since I became a Bureau of Land Management.
Okay, next slide, please, if you can make it there. Now I'm just going to do a whirlwind tour of the incredible things that are going on in the world that people frequently don't know anything about. And this is what's going to take us through the rigors of the next decade or 2 or 3. La Via Campesina represents 200 million peasant farmers advocating for women's rights, organic farming, agroecology. It's the international peasant's voice globalizing hope, globalizing the struggle. It's an international movement bringing together millions of peasants, small and medium-sized farmers, landless people, rural women and youth, indigenous people, migrants, and agricultural workers from around the world, built on a strong sense of unity, solidarity between these groups. It defends peasant agriculture for food sovereignty as a way to promote social justice, dignity, and strongly opposes corporate-driven agriculture that destroys social relations and nature. Next slide, please. This is their current homepage, and I suggest that you go and check them out. They're a remarkable organization. I have a sheet of references, so I've got the links and some the links and some descriptions of what they're about. Next slide, please. Seeds are our ancestors, and this is a reminder of how much we in cities and in busy civilizations have to remember. Could you play that, please?
What is a seed? Our past, our present, and our future.
Our ancestors, our future generations.
Knowledge and cosmic understanding.
We are humbled by the seeds.
Seeds are what sustain me and my family.
The seeds of my ancestors.
Seeds are our children.
They're creation's children.
Seeds are our culture, our heritage.
Our past, our history, and our health.
It's in our DNA. It's in our spirit that we know this.
We need to unite as a Native community to protect the seeds.
We're developing a network of seed stewards, seed keepers, seed growers.
Resources and wisdom together in a big circle.
Teaching, instructing.
Having seed exchanges. It's not only growing good seeds and creating access for them, but it's growing good seed stewards.
Multi-generational activities, carrying on our heritage.
Be self-reliant and self-sufficient.
Nourish those seeds and get them back on the table and into people's lives.
Because it's all about food, right?
You exploit what you merely value, but you defend what you love. And part of the seed sovereignty movement is remembering to love our seeds because they are our relatives.
The seed movement is not just the responsibility of the farmers or gardeners in our communities, but it's everyone's responsibility.
Decide what is being planted, where it's being planted, and by whom it's being harvested and gathered and cooked.
From seed to seed, just as our ancestors cared for them.
Corporations want to come in and buy the rights to our homeland's ability to make and keep life.
Nobody owns these seeds. Those seeds are life. We are who our ancestors dreamed of. We need to be the ancestors to our future generations.
Next slide, please. So I'm just going to take you quickly through some remarkable efforts and websites. And this barely touches the surface, but it shows how many extraordinary people are doing extraordinary things. This is the Global Landscapes Forum. And it's a relatively recent UN effort to bring people together who are doing regenerative work. I went to a conference in 2018 in New York City, and I walked into a room of 400 people, all languages, colors, dress, how we are going to regenerate healthy land and food. Next, please. This is the youth initiative of the Global Landscape Forum, including over 50,000 young people who are working in this direction. Next slide, please. This is Permaculture Farm. This is William Horvath, who lives in Bulgaria and has developed on his own major permaculture effort and makes it available to people all over the world. So you don't have to be a United Nations. You don't even have to be a Bio for Climate. You just have to be one person with a passion and a willingness to share. Next slide, please. And that's William, and he's standing here with Mark Shepard, who is one of our favorite permaculturists and taking us towards perennial cropping. Next slide, please. This is a Balkan ecology project. This family of four, they're British expatriates. They moved to the Balkans to get out of the rat race, and they created a whole educational and food production system in their area. Next slide, please. And this is where they live. And I wouldn't mind living there either. Next slide, please. And this is the Savory Institute. I think many of us know about the Savory Institute, and they're currently have around 13 million hectares under care from various hubs, 47 hubs, and several hubs in the waiting around the world. Next slide. And this is the Africa Center for Holistic Management, and that's where Alan started his work, and we've had speakers from there, and the Africa Center has done remarkable things for the community and organized various tribes in the area to do regenerative grazing. Next slide, please. And here's a rain garden in Maryland, right close to home for many of you folks. And the rain is redirected from the streets into the ground where it's supposed to go. And it helps prevent flooding and overflowing into sewage. And of course, it makes lovely areas to walk by. Next slide, please. And that's my grandson, who says thank you for helping him have a world that's worth living in. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam, for that presentation. It was definitely great to see all those examples from around the world of what people are doing, and to transition more or over to some more local solutions. We would love to hear, and we're going to hear from Rev Deli. Rev Deli is a grandmother, author, and pastor who opens the environmental narrative to include the voice of Mother Nature, so we create joy with our impact. With a personal indigenous lineage, including Yoruba, Akan, Cherokee, and Micmac, Rev Deli was blessed to become an Odinsini with the Akan Spiritual United Order just before she was ordained in the United Church of Christ in 1999. She trained as a climate reality leader in 2014 in Johannesburg and combines her spiritual direction skills to guide the next generation of resilience leaders in faith, ecology, and economic empowerment. Deli is currently launching a national initiative merging contemplation and permaculture to calm our society in climate chaos. Her vision is to train 300 resilience leaders in 30 communities that need the most assistance. She is a member of the Northeast Farmers of Color Network and the Cooperative Gardens Commission, among many other affiliations and service roles. Rev Deli, please.
Okay. Well, peace and blessings, everyone. Just want to let you know, I came into this work kind of innocently. When I did Katrina response work in 2005, I was down on the ground in New Orleans and opening a healing arts center. And that's where the volunteers came and showed me all about permaculture. And what I noticed is that there was so much joy as they were, planting sunflowers in one area, mushrooms in another area, lasagna gardening, so that the soil that the center was on could be remediated. And I realized, we need this in urban areas, even if there is no hurricane. Just prior to that, I had worked with middle school age boys from Washington, D.C. and from Southern Virginia, took them on a 1 week coming of age environmental arts camp. And their transition was phenomenal. They were on 80 acres of land, just doing what young boys do. And we noticed that in the middle of the week, they were running away from us. And when the staff went to go find them, we found that they were praying together, just on their own. Now, these were not all Christian people. These were African religious, traditional African religious practitioners. There were children who had no religion at home, but there was something about being in nature that brought them together to share from their hearts with each other. And so I realized at that point, okay, I want to do all of my ministry in nature because it obviously accelerates the process. So I went to Southern Virginia on some family land, was practicing permaculture, minding my own business, raking pine straw out of the forest, restoring that particular 12 acres of land. When all of a sudden out of the deep, out of the sky, a voice said, "This is not your work." And I said, "What do you mean this is not my work? You know all the sacrifices that I've given to do this?" And just as I was getting ready to argue with the divine, a swarm of ticks drove me out of the forest. So that ended that argument. Bring it back to soil and souls. So that's what so I left that piece of land to figure out why were communities of color not prepared to care for themselves? Why were we not engaged in the resilience efforts that I see other places? And so I've been up and down the Eastern Seaboard, working with young adults from 18 to 35, and I have figured out a few reasons why not. Next slide, please. One of the things is that our young people are they're spiritually hungry, and they're yearning for some sort of consistent spiritual engagement. And nature helps us to cross ideologies or to make sure that they're not barriers to engaging our natural oneness. And so I wrote a book called Breath of Life that helps people move through that process. The book is on Amazon. It's a 5-week Bible study, but I have found that people without religion have found it equally enriching because I just have songs, I have breath work, I have community activities in the book. And I also have the ecological, the sacred science story, so that people begin to reconnect with that. So I want to, and I found that the permaculture systems and things that I practice, the 7-layer forest system, I found that it is actually a blueprint for our social society. Just like there are elders and young adults, teenagers, young people, we need to be looking at how we engage each other intergenerationally and institutionally in our neighborhoods. We need to, again, kind of fill in the layers that are missing. Just like across the country, we find that the middle of the forest is missing most places. In our institutions, the middle generations are missing. In our faith institutions, in social clubs, that young adult range, they're not there. They have checked out. They're doing something else. And that's what we need in order to address this crisis. We need open minds and strong backs. Okay, so that's who we need to be leading us into our next area of thriving. So I wanted to, I've taught permaculture in lots of, in fancy places, but what I'm finding as I'm doing the community organizing on the ground is that our institutions have a lot of institutional barriers that keep them from working with each other. It is not possible to be sustainable by yourself. And yet there are all kinds of reasons why institutions can't or won't work with each other. And so I'm starting to look at that, and we're changing some strategies. And I want to share with you just a real brief excerpt from the Breath of Life book. And I want you to picture that you are at a baseball game. You're at a baseball stadium, okay? The stands are full and the bases are loaded. A hush goes over the crowd as the batter takes his final warm-up swing, firmly plants himself over home plate. All eyes are on the ball as it spins perfectly into the zone. The bat cracks as it connects with the ball and sends it whirling past second base out into the outfield. Oh, the cheers turn to gasps as the crowd helplessly watches the batter sprint and slide into second base. He didn't go to first base. The outfielders are laughing and team members are arguing as the umpire trots up and definitively yells, "You're out." The batter shakes his head as he steps sadly back to the dugout. His teammates can't believe they have forfeited at least 3 home runs. But guess what? Bases are also loaded in our global climate situation. Too often, preachers, teachers, and activists want to skip to the second base of technical things to do, rules and regulations, policies and procedures. And guess what happens? We are out. We are out of alignment with God's abundance, and the batter can't figure out why. And guess what? Many of us in this room, we are that batter. We are out there doing things that are not specifically connected to nature. We're pointing the finger across the street when we have our own monoculture lawn at home. Charity begins at home. When we don't take the time to commune with the breath of God in nature, we forfeit the moral relationship that would prevent us from fouling the air we breathe or polluting the waters we drink. Let's change our morality before we attempt to change our laws. Let's stop running to second base. What I find is that a lot of activists are in despair, and you see them on social media. They're just, bleeding, emotionally bleeding, because while they're out there, stomping the pavement, they are not connecting their hearts and souls to Mother Nature, who specifically provides us with mental stability and emotional balance. And so that's where I'm shifting my work, is to make us make that first connection of behavior and morality. And I do that because, and I don't want to be really gross, but none of us would go to the bathroom on the kitchen table, right? Why? Because we have morality. We think that that's, not a cool thing to do. We don't typically take our trash and dump it in our bedrooms, okay? But because we are disconnected from nature, those are the kinds of behaviors that we commit in public life. And so I want us to take a step back. Next slide, please. Okay, and just after our spiritual engagement, we want to give people, like Adam just did, we want to give you visions of success. In 2012, there was a huge, drought. Temperatures soared so high that the airport in Washington, D.C. melted, right? So this same year, we have 2 farmers right next to each other. One in conventional farming, his crops died. The other one to the right, they use permaculture techniques and it's thriving. Okay, an urban food forest example. I specifically showed you a small plot because people say, well, I don't have much space. But here we have a very attractive space that is that uses also what they call defensive gardening techniques to keep out wildlife, dogs urinating, deer, so that you have a hedge row that provides a barrier, and inside is your kale, and are your tomatoes and all the yummy things that people want to eat. This is very easily done, as you see, in a very small space. Next slide. Okay, so after you've got your spiritual reconnection and you're all motivated and good to go, it helps to understand what is this 7-layer forest system that we're talking about. The canopy and the understory, the bushes and the vines. Yes, you have to have vines in a complete system. If you don't provide vines, Mother Nature will probably send you vines that you don't like. Okay, so we need to reassess our aesthetic. We need to create a sustainable aesthetic. So we begin to like the way that native plants look. I can't tell you how many times I've been trying to grow native plants and people tell me, well, you can't grow anything native. You got to put a box around it. Now, does that sound kind of like a social policy that we've been following? Don't you see that the way we treat the earth is the way we treat each other? And so we really are going to have to take this seriously in terms of how do we reconstruct society so that we can be harmonious and diverse and work together. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a blueprint that we created for Soil and Souls when we're working with institutions, of having faith communities work together, that they would partner with young adults who may or may not be connected to that institution. And then of course we have community stakeholders, partners, and allies. I have found that as I've been teaching faith communities around the country, that invariably they fall short of being able to pull together 3 or 4 other institutions to work with them. We start off by saying, oh yeah, we've got people to work with. And by the time I show up to teach, there's 2 people in the room or 2 institutions. That doesn't work. So we're gonna try something new. Next slide. We're gonna break it down to your personal level. And so I don't see any labels. That's right, because I don't know your name. You are in that picture, okay? I want you to find 2 other people who live within walking distance of you to form a human guild. Okay, we know that in nature, a guild are plants that have a symbiotic relationship, and by growing together, they support one another. Well, in our human society, for some reason, we can only get along with certain people who live across the street, across town usually, or people who live in another country, and our neighbors we don't know, we don't talk to, and that's causing us a problem. Okay, that's not resilient behavior. And so I'm challenging you. I'm challenging you to do something odd. I want you to talk to people that you can walk to their house. Oh my God, we haven't done that in years. But I want you to try it, okay? And I want you to agree to work with some individuals, to learn together, and to help each other, to pledge that you will have 2 people come over and help you in your yard, and then 2 of you will go and help someone else's yard, and then you'll go to the 3rd person's yard. We need to recreate this barn raising ethic, because we've got to reprogram our minds in terms of how we behave towards one another. That's that first layer of resilience that is missing, okay? We have in this country, depending on whose estimates you're looking at, anywhere from 40 million to 70 million acres of lawn. It's the highest or the most abundant cash crop. It's not even a cash crop, but it's the most abundant crop that is grown in the United States are lawns. It feeds no one, and it does not provide you with any cash. Plus, it is a major component in raising the temperatures in our neighborhoods. And so I want you to consider thinking about this first line of defense that you have complete control over. Even if you have 2 square feet in your yard, or all you have is the median, the public median, work with that, work with what you have. You're in an apartment building, get permission to, do a small demonstration piece. This is something that is accessible to everyone. And more important, I will say more important than the temperature that you can bring down and all the wonderful native plants and beautiful plants and food that you can grow. What's even more important are the social relationships that are nurtured and cultivated, because without those social relationships, this is not sustainable. Human beings need to recreate that barn raising ethic and come back into community with one another. And with that, that's all I have to say, because we're going to move into the challenge.
Thank you, Reb Deli. definitely very inspiring work that you've done and continue to do. And you've given us, I'm sure, a lot to think about in terms of our connection and our relationship, both you and Adam, to nature and the environment. And, you know, I think that one of the things that comes to my mind is, you know, seeing how there's a disconnect and from the American society in general with agriculture, you know, where we have folks from other parts of the world who, you know, a lot of folks that I work with in the Latino community are much more connected, for example, to nature, where from, you know, Central America, South America, having a fruit tree and having nuts and going outside and pulling those things as a daily part of their life, I think creates more of a connection opportunity. So having that missing from us and knowing that we just go to the supermarket to get our needs, I think that plays part of that. Would you expand on that point quickly before we moved into the small groups?
Yes, I think I'm going to go back to doomsday talk now, because if you shop at a supermarket, you're in trouble. Okay, if you get your food from a supermarket, you're in trouble, because you will be subject to the supply chain interruptions that happen when we keep having, you know, fires and floods and disasters, and not just thousands, millions of people being displaced from who knows where to next door to you. Okay, so this is, if you're depending on the system to work as it's been working, you are the one who is at risk. Okay, and so that's why it's important for us to regain local, not only access, but regain sovereignty over growing our food and learning how to manage our own water even. I mean, there are really simple ways that we can collect rainwater and have it available for us when we need it. And I think this is the mental shift that needs to happen to inspire us to say, well, you know, everything's okay. No, everything is not okay right now. You're just, right now, the people who are having food shortages are just not in your neighborhood, but they're around the corner and you don't know it because you don't talk to the people in your, you know, in your region. And so I just, and even besides the doom and gloom, you know, from a spiritual point of view, you know, God gave us an abundant planet that produces more than anybody needs, you know, in the book that many of us read, you know, that the first thing that God did was create a garden, and God created that garden with a tree. And in that, with the trees were planted trees that were good to look at and trees that were good for food, medicines, everything was all mixed up in this space. This is the way it was done in the beginning. This is the blueprint. These are the manufacturing instructions that came for humans. Okay, so we need to change. There's some kind of corrupt bug in our software, okay, in our mental software, and we need to debug it, okay, and get back to what is natural and normal and abundant, because abundance undergirds peace. Okay, everyone wants peace, but guess what? All of these revolutions we see around the world, they didn't just happen because politicians lie. Okay, politicians lie all the time. They happen because people were hungry. Okay, you're going to be hungry too if you don't get your act together. So, was that okay?
Yes, thank you, Rev Deli. Adam, do you want to add anything before we go into small group? You're muted. You're on mute.
Oh, I unmuted myself.
There you go.
You know, of course, I agree wholeheartedly with Rev Deli about the importance of connecting locally and connecting with our food. As someone who grew up in Manhattan, in Hell's Kitchen, in retrospect, it was a very, very strange experience because there was no soil in New York City, and there still isn't. I mean, even Central Park, the soil is limited mostly to grass. And grass, you know, Kentucky bluegrass goes down about 4 inches, and we need grasses that go down 2, 3, 4, 5 feet. And the only wildlife that I knew were cockroaches. And the plants that I knew were these intrepid little grasses that grew up between the cracks in the concrete. There is nowhere to touch the earth or be touched by the earth in cities until we make radical changes in them. And I would just say that Bio for Climate is leading an effort to plant Miyawaki forests. Those are intensely grown, small native plantings of forests at various levels that Delhi showed us. And they grow very fast. And in 3 or 4 years, you have a canopy and you are bringing life back to cities. You can do it in as small as 6 parking spaces. And so we have to do this. I mean,
I think the important piece that Adam mentioned is that this is on land that you control. We all know that cities have lots of vacant lots, and that could be a place for us to grow food. It can be a place to grow beauty, but we have found that when people start to do that, all of a sudden the city sees, oh my gosh, we need another use for that. And so people get jerked around. I've been working with farmers who've been displaced. And so really the key here is to bring this home, bring it home to land that you control and that you look at every day, just like Adam is saying.
Great, thank you. And that leads us into an excellent segue into our small group discussion. You know, having Rev Delhi and Adam Sachs share some of their experiences and their work, and it really sets the stage for a discussion amongst us. And that the hope is that we can, you know, work together, you know, find out about one another, perhaps, you know, join in forces, support one another's efforts, and hope that you make those relationships. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into small breakout rooms of people of three to a group. We'll have 10 minutes to discuss, to get to know each other, to share our thoughts and experiences. Unfortunately, we were having some technical difficulty with the poll. We had hoped to pair you by region or by zip code. So we're just going to throw you together and hope that you find some synergies in there. And we definitely want you to stay connected afterwards. So even if you're not in the same region, same location, you know, we know that having folks to chat with, to commiserate, to share positive experiences and knowledge points is always a good thing. So for the breakout room, we asked you to consider, and this the response from Adam Sachs and Rev Delhi were perfect in terms of the disconnect between our food and the things that we're trying to accomplish. So think about, well, first of all, where are you located? So share that point, and then think about the pre-colonial ecosystem of where you live. Was it a forest, a meadow, grassland, floodplains, et cetera? In Manhattan, what did we have there? And, you know, in the 1600s, what do we have here in where I'm in Washington, D.C.? It's primarily swampland. So think about what that system looked like before civilization took root and spread out. And then what are your aspirations for restoration efforts in your area? So thinking about what was there before, and then what we can do or how we can accomplish it, and how we can invite people to make those connections into that restoration process. And I'll put those things in the chat as well, those questions. So I think right now we're going to head to our breakout rooms. Zoomologist, go ahead and do your thing.
That did not seem like 10 minutes.
No, it went fast. But thank you all. I learned a lot.
I'm glad you're doing the kelp seeds. That's wonderful, Rachel. Yeah, this water is too warm for kelp and not warm enough for to answer your question, not warm enough for the mangroves. So we're in the middle of the Atlantic, so it's different, and we don't have the right requirements for those two. But we do grow willows.
So I think we're all coming back bit by bit. We probably have everyone was kicked out or almost joining us. So I hope that you were able to make connections and talk to people about some of your work and your challenges. One thing that we in our group had discussed is how to make connections in the places that are most needed. I know in where I live, it's highly dense, and other people as well. Communities of color, lower income communities have less access to green space. So when we're trying to think of ways to show or demonstrate the importance of nature, and we don't have examples of that, how do we do that, right? So one of the things that we do is, using an activity called the life of a pencil, and using that as a model to show where things are sourced. So a pencil is simple, everyone knows what it is. We have wood, we have rubber or latex, we have the graphite or the lead, the tin, and just talk about where those things are sourced from. Africa, Canada, from Europe, from the US, or from wherever for all these products, and they have to go to or transported to. First of all, they have to be harvested, and how that's done. They have to be transported to the factory. The factory has to convert the product to the usable thing, the pencil, and then from there it gets shipped to a distributor, and then from the distributor it gets shipped to another distributor, and then it gets shipped to the store, and then we go purchase that. So working, with the examples that we have to raise consciousness about the consumer choices that we make. And I know that I would love to hear from other folks in their discussion group. Does anyone have questions or would like to share where what they came up with, or some interesting points?
And you could either put a comment in the chat or unmute. I think we're a small enough group now.
I'll just say again, likewise for our group, we talked about how do we achieve environmental equity for those who don't have environmental equity and don't have financial equity and are struggling and really suffer from the being in food deserts and green deserts and living in concrete villages. So I think those of us who are called by our faith, called by our gods, whoever they might be, to reach out to those who are struggling with inequity. Because I think environmental equity can positively impact the outcomes for our society.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Patricia. And
I'd
Deli,
like to
you've got,
respond
yes,
to that.
please.
I think she's absolutely right. And I think, as people of faith, we are reminded that charity begins at home. And so when we can make our home, our land, our lawn an example because that's one of the first things that comes up when I'm working with young people. They want to go see where is it being done. Okay, and I know even in Washington, D.C., you have the Casey Trees Foundation who's been planting stuff all over the place. You have places where people can go see it being done, but we all need help replicating that ourselves. And the other thing, again, that Soil and Souls addresses is the economic component. We need to take this out of the hobby. We've got to move beyond hobby gardening and hobby farming and look at how can we grow a product, make something value added, grow tomatoes and chili peppers, make salsa and sell it, so that we're always looking at how do we create an economic opportunity for the people who are engaged, so that they learn about the supply system, so that they learn how to be a producer and come out of the consumer bracket that you've been caged into. And those things can be addressed. We just have to think about it at the beginning so that we set up our outreach to include those components.
Yes, very much so. The communities that I work with, primarily Catholic, and often refer to the Pope's encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, and the call for the faithful to care for the common home, and looking at the environment through the lens of faith and the creation, and really inviting and allowing people to continue to make that connection through the faith lens, through their beliefs, I think is a super powerful way to connect. Are there any other questions? I see that there are a couple comments here in the chat. Let's see, Jim Schulman says, I'm skeptical that urban ag can feed the world. Even urban ag scientists say this. So reforming extensive ag practices seems to be as important as replacing grass from suburban yards. Adam or Revdal, would you like to expand on that?
That's a fallacy that we're feeding the world. The commodity growing that's being done by large farmers is not feeding people anyway. It's creating fuel and feeding animals. But a lot of that, we don't need to feed the world. We only need to feed the communities that we live in. And if you look at the state of Vermont, they have taken all of those little small communities and created distribution networks and have become somewhat food sovereign. And I think that is the goal, is that we bring that idea of food sovereignty, that we own and we control the distribution of the food that we consume. And that's the goal. We're not trying to feed the world. We need to feed ourselves and be in community with other people feeding themselves.
And I just might add to that La Via Campesina maintains that the small farmers around the world feeding their local communities produce 70% of the food for the world.
Yeah, and a comment here from Mark Imlay says, think and act locally, regionally, nationally, and globally, all of them. Right, so looking at our connection to nature, the environment, to agriculture, to our own food needs, and thinking how we can provide for that in a way that is sustainable, in a way that is takes into consideration all these points that we've heard, and knowing how that these urban practices or the agricultural practices have a tremendous negative impact, especially when we talk about stormwater runoff and fertilizers into our waterways and our water systems, and water quality issues that lead into a whole host of other issues. Let's see.
I want to dovetail that just a little bit. When you're talking about stormwater runoff and how we need to re-landscape those particular areas, one of the barriers that we run into is, the homeowners association and everybody trying to create a garden that looks like Louis XIV, which is all, this idea of exotic plants and that sort of thing. We all need to change what we think is beautiful. And that's a piece that we, again, one of those pieces we jump over.
Reverend, we just passed a law. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
We just passed a law in Maryland that homeowner associations cannot take away your native plant garden. We just got that passed in the last session.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Boy, I want that article.
Okay, I will send it to you. Send me the email.
Who is that speaking? Is that Mark Inlet? Who is
Yes.
that? That's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a bunch of groups get together and we did it. It's just amazing. I
Is that
represent
on the state level or the county level?
It's the state level.
Okay. What is the name of the law?
Right now. I have to send it to you. I forgot now, but the law is on our side now.
Maybe we can send that to all the registered people, you know, as a, you know, our little follow-up email.
Yeah.
So send me an email and I'll respond and send that to you.
I'll put mine in the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that comment. It's great news. So, you know, what we're past our time here, but I wanted to give people the opportunity to ask questions and invite you to stay on for a few more minutes if you're interested. Are there any other questions out there that we could take on?
I have a
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you were unmuted already. Now you're muted.
Now I'm unmuted.
There you go.
Yeah. We stopped the use of pesticides in our community and synthetic fertilizer. You can do that through your city. You can lobby with the councillors, and we don't allow councillors in our city who are in favor of pesticides or synthetic fertilizers. So it's made a big difference. We've done lots of things in our city that you can do. So now nobody's allowed to use those toxic things in their gardens. And we also have a community garden that about 35 people run, and we produce a terrific lot of vegetables for people who need them, for Harvest for Hunger. That way.
Wonderful, thank you.
Is that South Portland, Oregon?
No, it's South Portland, Maine.
South Portland, Maine. Hello, Rachel.
Hello. We also stopped the tar sands from coming from Alberta. You can do this by organizing in your city.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So as we wrap up, and I will let Luis and Annabelle do a wrap up here for us, but I want to kind of leave you with a little bit of food for thought in terms of resiliency and what that means for the communities most impacted by these severe weather and more frequent and intense weather phenomenon. And that's the Black and Brown Indigenous folks, lower income folks, who visually I do not see represented here outside of our panel. It is super important that we think about ways to make this issue relatable. Missing a day of work to participate with these organizations, with your effort, means $75, $100 not coming in the door. That means groceries, that means rent. That is real implications to the folks that are most impacted by climate change, by heat island effect, by air quality, by water quality. And those numbers bear out in the economic or the health indicators in our community. You'll see higher rates of asthma, heart disease, diabetes, everything that is related, that is partially due in part to environmental conditions, those co-determinants of health. So when you're engaging in asking people to join you, you can't speak to folks in terms of 2 degrees. You have to make it more relatable. You have to make it more of something that is a priority, and that's family, faith, and income, right? So think about that in those terms through that lens. I will give Rev Del and Adam Sachs an opportunity to say a final word or two and then pass it over to Louise.
Tag Deli, you're it.
Okay. Actually, I was just going to share one of the prayer out of my book. Let me get back to. It says, Gracious One, you see through my eyes and you breathe through my lungs. Allow me to breathe freely the breath of life and to help all people to do the same. Strengthen my inner being and give me courage to live a life of compassion within my family, strength within my community, and to perform justice that balances the world. Amen, Ashe, Aho.
Amen. And I would just say, we can do this.
We can.
Thank you. And Louise, you take us home?
Yes, thank you, Abel, and thank you, Adam and Rev Deli, for those amazing wise words and for your sharing your amazing expertise and information for us all and for the conversation here tonight. I'm going to share my screen and just show you a few upcoming events that are, let's see, here we go. So first, as far as next steps go, I'm going to send a follow-up email to everyone related to this event, to survey you about this event, share the recording of the webinar, and also to give you an opportunity to sign up for an initiative to launch a restoration project either in your yard or in your neighborhood. DIY Green also has a newsletter, and you can follow us on our social media pages via our website. These upcoming events, Annabelle posted in the chat that DIY Green is going to be hosting a series of weekly community conversations called In Pursuit of Health, Happiness, and Climate Resilience. And that series is starting on Tuesday, August 10th. Biodiversity for a Livable Climate is hosting an upcoming event called Life After Fossil Fuels. And the speaker is Alice Friedman. And the series that this is a part of is called Life Saves the Planet. And that information will be on their website. That is on August 16th. And I will send this information out in the follow-up email as well. And then Abel Olivo here is hosting a Latino Leader Summit on September 16th. And that's sponsored by his organization, Defensores de la Cuenca. So we want to thank you for joining us, and we'll be in touch. And it was a very rich conversation, and thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.